put that poultice, take that wad of, just like you would tobacco years ago, and put it on that bee sting, and it will take the sting out within minutes. If you've never done it, we'll try to go outside and look for some plantain. Y'all may have it here. I'm sure you do have plantain here. Yeah, and it's a wonderful herb. It has allanto in it, just like aloe does. So it will actually heal faster than aloe, or even something like ivy itch or poison ivy creams. Anything it's wonderful for poison ivy. I'm terribly allergic to poison ivy. You know how some people say they can just look at it? Well, it is in the air. It is in the air, and I happen to be one of those people that if I walk through that little breeze, I'm going to have it all over. My dad got it in his bloodstream one time. I've never had it that bad as he did, but I have had it to where it looked like I was just eaten up. You know, it looked like someone had thrown acid on me because I was just so inflamed. Part of the issue with any rash like that is inflammation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about inflammation as well, and I'm going to talk about several herbs that are close to you here in this area. Now, if you have a phone, if you want to look them up, George and I were trying to do some magic over here, technological magic, but it just wasn't happening. So if I talk about a plant and you want to look it up on your phone, by all means do that. Just Google it or Brave it. I brave things. So if you just go to whatever your platform is and just Google that and look for the image, and then that way you can study it a little bit more when you get home. I'm going to tell you several uses now while we talk about these plants, but I'm just going to kind of go with what I feel God has led me to talk to y'all about. I have a Christian herbalist group. We are Christ-centered. Everything I do is Christ-centered. I am not by any means a witch. I take offense to that when someone does make a joke about that. I'll stop them very quickly. I'm not a witch. There are people who will say they are green witches. I do want to say that I am not even a green witch or a hedge witch. Back in the day, years ago, witch or wench meant something completely different than what it is today. So I try not to take offense when someone calls me a witch, but I do because I am not a witch. I am, and as a matter of fact, a friend of mine, John Moody, said we have allowed pagans and earth worshipers to take ownership of the earth, and we as Christians were given, as God's children, we were given every plant of the earth, and somehow we have allowed earth worshipers to claim that, and it's time for us to take that back as God-centered healing and God-centered herbalism. So I have a profound desire that everyone knows that, and if you have a question on any of that, I would certainly be glad to talk to you a little bit further about improving your own experience with God, because I feel like everyone needs to have that journey. Okay, let's talk about plants. We just started talking about plantain. Is anybody not familiar with plantain? Most everybody in here is. And I'm talking about the grass, not the banana type fruit. Okay, so okay, that's quite all right. It's amazing how many people don't know what it is, but then when you show it to them, it's, oh, I know what that is. I have that in my yard. So don't hesitate. If you don't know that plant, by all means get to know it. If you want to look it up, there's two types. The first one is the native. Now there's a kind of a misnomer. It's called white man's footprint. That's not quite accurate because there was a native plantain here. If you know what the lance leaf plantain looks like, it's very skinny, very long ribbed leaf. If you find that in your yard, that one is the one that came over from Europe. But the Plantago major, the leaves will be nice wide leaves. I've got one that the leaf is as big as my face. But if it has a red edge to where the stem connects to the rosette, That's the native. I wouldn't trade one for the other. I do prefer the native when I have it, just because I like it better, but my yard is full of the European variety. Very good for everybody to know. And it's not only good for skin. If you have H. pylori, which is ulcers, if you have ulcerative colitis, IBS, hemorrhoids, anything starting from your mouth all the way through digestion, plantain is very good for that. I'm going to talk to you about things I want you to have in case of survival issues, or if you can't get to a doctor, or things that you can just take care of at home. Plantain is the number one I would suggest, simply because it works internally as well as externally. If you take and swallow those juices, I know a fellow who has cancer. He's got bone cancer. And he had started, the medicines were having an effect on his gut. And I said, go get you some plantain. You can juice it. So he started juicing it at first. He didn't have a juicer, so he would put it in the blender with about a cup of water, get 3 or 4 leaves, spin it until it was just a pulp, and then strain that and drink the juice. And it started healing the ulcers and I use healing lightly, it started taking care of the ulcers that the medicine was causing. All of that, he was sick every day, both throwing up and everything else. And it stopped just like that. Well, he eventually got to where he was just going and picking his leaves and eating them. He would eat 3 or 4 of those leaves a day. Not only did it make his skin look better, even after all of that chemo, he was getting better on the inside. And when he stopped the chemo, it's been about 5 years, and he is still in remission. And I'm not going to say it was the plantain. I'm not going to say that. You can say that if you want to, or he can say that, but I'm not going to say that. But he is still alive, still functioning, still working, actually, at 5 years bone cancer. So, yes, ma'am.
So it would be good for healing leaky gut?
Healing, say that again. Leaky gut, it would definitely help. I'm not going to say it would heal it, but it would definitely help because it's going to work on the mucosal tissue in the gut. And leaky gut is that's part of the issue with leaky gut. There are some other things I would certainly suggest. Nutrition, number one, because our diets are notoriously bad, especially in America. Our diets are poor. And the things that you think, for example, we just got new water filters. This Fiji water that's so pure read a 59 on my meter out of 100. So was it 59? 59 that it read?
Your well?
No, my well water read better than the Fiji.
That Fiji was
144, sorry. And I'm drinking it, but because I forgot to bring some water. But we bought a new filter for all of the places that we needed it. And when I filter it, it goes down to 0. But we were filtering out toxins, and this is well water as well as city water. One place has city, one place has well. Toxins, lead, all of the things that's in your water that's horrible for your gut.
What kind of water filter?
The water filter that I purchased is called Zero Water. It's a pitcher. You can get a bigger system, but I just use pitchers instead of, I used to use a Berkey. Well, there's half a dozen lawsuits with Berkey because Berkey will filter about 200 gallons and it won't get nearly everything that they're saying that it gets. Even at about 20 gallons, it was still not filtering what they said it would. So they say it'll filter 300 or 3,000 gallons. It was filtering not 200. And so there's quite a few lawsuits out on Berkey. I'm not sure how they've gone, but anyway, my water is now filtered much better than bottled water. But our diets are just notoriously horrible. Whether even if you cut out sugar or you cut out grains, you cut out all of these things. Grain is subsidized, so you will find whey in everything. And that's the reason for it. Yes.
Do you deal with any kind of pH?
I have an ionizer, ozonator, excuse me, not an ionizer, it's an ozonator. pH, no, not really, but some people talk about alkalinity, but that's plantain, yeah. The gut needs to be acidic. So if you're alkalinizing in the beginning, you're neutralizing the acid in your stomach. So I feel like alkalinity is not always the best thing. There's a controversy about that. So if you do prefer alkaline water or worry about your pH, that's fine. I just don't at this point. I may find that to be different later. But at this point, I don't worry about the alkalinity too much. Not as much as I do toxins in my water. So, and there's several other areas in your body that needs to be alkaline. Not everything needs to be, not everything needs to be alkaline. Some things do need to be acidic. So there's especially digestion. So because it is acids and things like that. Did you have a question?
I did actually.
Okay.
If you have a problem with inflammation,
Well, I'm going to talk a lot about inflammation.
immunocompromised, how do you handle that?
I'm going to talk about inflammation. Our diets can take care of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be alkaline water. So I'll address that in just a few minutes. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about plantain helping heal that mucosal tissue. Same works for the outside, except on the outside it's emollient. Inside it's mucosal, outside it's or mucilagenic. But if you can take that same plant to be emollient on the outside. So not only do I put plantain for a boo-boo or a bee sting, something like that, I'll put it in my bath oil as well. So you can do it as an oil. You can do it as a tea. You can use it as, like my friend does, he blends it up. He puts it in the blender to juice it. He doesn't have a juicer. He just blends it up in the water, as I said, and drinks the water, strains it, drinks the water. And it's wonderful to get into your system. All of the chlorophyll is wonderful for the gut. You were asking about leaky gut. Chlorophyll will help not only the things like chlorophyll, but nutrients. I suggest everybody has a very good trace mineral. If you're not using trace minerals now in your water, especially if you're filtering your water, you're filtering out any minerals as well. That's like an antibiotic. An antibiotic gets rid of bad bacteria, but most of that bacteria is good bacteria, so it can take 2 years after an antibiotic. It can take 2 years to get your system back in order. Yes, ma'am?
Change the nutritional value when you boil or heat the herbs which is fresh?
The question was, do you change the nutritional value? If it's a precursor, no, it does not change. Something that has a precursor, for example, vitamin C. You've heard don't boil your broccoli because it'll take away the vitamin C. Drink the water. Drink the broccoli water. Or if you steam it, it would be better because it cooks quicker than if you were boiling it. But just don't forget to drink that water. Put that water in a soup or freeze it. You're also going to get more nutrition out of food if you freeze it first, simply because you're breaking those cell walls and it's gonna digest easier. So if it has a precursor to vitamin C, for example, one of the best, I'm looking to see if you have it, one of the best vitamin C sources is white pine. If you're taking a vitamin C supplement, most of those, I'm going to say, when I say most, I'm going to say at least 95% of the vitamin C supplements are made from corn. Not only corn, the mold on corn. And it's not the good kind, that's the, what's that called? You know, smut, yeah, corn smut. That's a delicacy in certain places. It's not the good one like that. It's a mold on corn that they create vitamin C. It's not the pretty little lemon that's on the label. Funny how we just assumed, right? They didn't tell us it was made from lemons. We just assumed that it was made from lemons, right? And when they tell you that the vitamin C, your daily requirement of vitamin C is 1 orange, they don't tell you that includes the peel as well. Never told you that, right? So you're thinking you're doing a great thing, getting your daily RDA of vitamin C by eating an orange. Well, you're only getting half that. So, because you're leaving out the peel, unless you're zesting the peel and juicing it or something like that, or dehydrating it, putting it in your food. But white pine is the absolute best source of vitamin C. Also, rose hips, absolute wonderful vitamin C source. So after the flower, does everybody know what a rose hip is? Okay. The hip is what holds the petals. And once the petals are gone, you'll see a little ball on the rose bush, little red ball, or it'd be green balls, and then they'll turn red after a frost. Those are the hips that holds the flower. The rose hips, and then also persimmon leaf. Persimmon leaf in the fall, once it starts getting spotty and turning just slightly, that's the best time to get a vitamin C source. So, any persimmon. Mostly American persimmon I prefer because they grow naturally, but a Japanese persimmon, if you have enough to get your leaves off of a Japanese or an Oriental persimmon, then you can certainly use those as well. But you'll want...
Can you freeze it to save that leaf throughout the year?
You can, but they'll dehydrate just as well. And you won't lose the vitamin C because it's a precursor to vitamin C. Now what that means is it's going to be more bioavailable to your body.
And what part of the pine?
The pine is the white pine. However, excuse me, not the white pine. It is a white pine. Other pines are good as well, but it's the needles. And if you want a good guide, if you take that many, gather white pine needles, and especially the terminal ends, which means they come out the branch like this and there'll be one off the end of the shoot. These are fine, but this one has more in it. Does that make sense what I just said? Okay. If you take this much, meaning you can just pull them straight off, you don't have to cut them, and they'll be 3 or 4 inches long. If you get that many, just fill that up and put them in a quart of water. Put them in a jar. You can chop them up if you need to. Put them in a jar and then pour boiling water over it, simmering water over that, and let that steep until it gets cool. It tastes great. You can sweeten it with honey or sugar or good sugar, whatever you want to sweeten it with. If you have diabetes and you don't want to use that and you're using monk fruit or xylitol, something like that, you can certainly use that if you like it. I just drink it straight. I don't mind it at all. It's not bitter. It's not unpleasant. Make sure when you have it in your jar, you put a lid on it, and that will keep the volatile oils in your jar, in your liquid. You want the volatile oils, specifically the terpenes. Terpene, what does that sound like? Turpentine. You're not drinking turpentine. However, I do know people who will use turpentine to get rid of parasites. So they're taking a scant teaspoon of turpentine for so many days, and you can get rid of parasites. That's not just for a beginner. I'm just saying that as a connection to terpenes. But the white pine will actually have terpenes in it. So what are you doing? You're helping to get rid of parasites. You would need a much more than that 1 quart. Because the pine needles are the weakest part for the terpenes. They're the highest source for vitamin C. Another way to get the vitamin C, terpenes, and also something called pycnogenol and that's let me see if I can spell that, Pycnoginol, I think. It's PYC, pycnogenol, and I think I pronounced it right. But the best way to get that is from the cambium layer on the tree. Does everybody know what the cambium layer is? Cambium layer is the inner layer of bark. That's where the most medicine is when you're talking about barks.
Are you looking about the pine?
On the pine? On the pine, yes. Well, on any tree, almost always, if you're going to use that tree for medicine, you'll want to get that inside bark. And the way you peel that is you just gently peel with a very sharp knife, gently peel off that outer layer, and then come back and peel off the inner layer. So that's how you get that inner layer where most of the time the medicine is. The only thing I can think of that you, right off the top of my head, that you wouldn't peel the outer layer off would be something like sparkleberry, which is a huckleberry. If you've got huckleberry here in the woods, very good for diabetes and cardiac conditions, especially when you have those together. You would use huckleberry bark, and you would not, it's so thin you wouldn't peel off the outer layer. Yellow root is another one. I was supposed to start out, sorry Lord, I was supposed to start out talking about antibiotics, and I was going to start talking about yellow root, and I got off on another track, so I'll get back to that in a minute. But you'll want to take off that outer bark with your knife and do as I tell you, don't do as I do, right? Take it off away from you, don't take it off like this. I'll take it off like this. Do as I say, don't do as I do. You have to take it away, you know, peel it. When you're peeling with your knife and you're peeling away the bark, point that knife away from you. Yes, sir.
The cambium layer, as I've experienced, is generally just a light layer of green.
Sometimes it'll be yellow or it'll be green. It'll be different than the wood. You'll see the core wood on the inside, and it's very thin. Sometimes it'll be, depending on the age and the type that you're getting, it may be as much as 1/8 of an inch thick. Like on an old sassafras, if you're peeling the bark off of those roots, you're going to get some nice thick cambium layer. But if you're having twigs or saplings, it's going to be pretty thin. So do it gently. It takes practice to where you get to where you can do it well. Something like willow, you can just about peel off the outer layer and take and slice. Like if this is if this is your willow twig, you can slice down it like this and almost peel that cambium layer off, especially on an older tree. Yeah.
On the pine needles, can you harvest them all year round?
You can harvest pine needles all year, except I don't suggest you doing it while the tree looks like it's brown, getting brown. It's shedding leaves at that point, and it's going to be hard to pick them out. So during those couple weeks that the tree is shedding, I wouldn't necessarily do it then. Doesn't mean you can't and just pick those out. Doesn't mean that it would hurt anything if you're taking those leaves as well. But when you want to get those, you can chop them up. And then if you don't have access to a pine tree, you can harvest those and dry them quickly on a low temperature. That means you can spread them out and put a fan on it, or if you have a dehydrator, keep it at 95. But you can you can gather those and just store them and use them up as you need to, and not have to go outside and pull them every time. Did you have a question?
Pycnogenol, is that for imaging?
Pycnogenol, there's several things pycnogenol will do, especially it's good for your skin, it's good for diabetics, it's good for heart conditions, it's good for several different things. So.
On that white pine, is it the needles that have the 5?
Some of them have 5, some will have 4. Even short needle pines will be just fine. You'll just have to adjust your measurement. This is for a long leaf pine that's about 4 inches. So if you're going to do that much, you may have to do it 2 or 3 times. If those needles are only this long, you'll have to get more needles. Make sense? Yes, ma'am.
The outer bark on a tree, that's the pycnogenol underneath. And is it a film? How do you eat it?
No, let me back up. Let's start that over again. When you use that bark, you're going to make a tea. You can make it into a tincture. I would prefer a tea for this particular herb. You wouldn't necessarily eat it unless you're going to make pine bark bacon, and you can do that, by the way. You can make pine bark bacon. You can take and pull the strips of that cambium layer, not the outer layer, the inner layer, and you don't have to use an oil. You can just bake it, but it's better if you put it in a pan with oil and very carefully cook it, roast it, and it'll get crispy and crunchy. It's not going to be pork bacon, but it'll be pine bark bacon. But you can eat that if you needed to survive. And I've eaten it not on a survival situation. I've eaten it otherwise because I think it's pretty good. But yeah, you can get your pycnogenol that way. There's one particular pine, and I believe it grows in France, that has more pycnogenol than others. However, white pines do have pycnogenol in it as well. And that's not the only thing that you would need from the pine. You're also talking about the vitamin C. There's a ton of minerals in a pine. There's just a lot of nutrients, and you're getting the nutrients from the living source, from the blood, from the circulatory system of the tree, just like we would. If we need a blood cleanser, what are we doing? That's the life, our lifeblood in our body. So you're talking about, when you talk about cleansing, you can talk about digestion, but we also talk about cleansing the blood because that's what carries nutrients. The same for the tree. That cambium layer is where it carries the nutrients to the tree. Okay. All right. The other source was rose hips. Rose hips, you want to pick those after the flowers fade, and they're sweeter after a frost. So some roses will bloom again in the fall. And I usually get the question, the garden roses, the single stem, what are they? Like the ones you would get in a bouquet. You can use those. I prefer multiflora rose simply because it's abundant and it's everywhere. If you've got an open field, the chances of you not having multiflora rose on your property is pretty slim in this area because it's so abundant. So you'll want to look for those and get those after a frost. It's funny how vitamin C, you think of vitamin C as being tropical, summer, but the best time to get it is in the fall. The persimmon trees, by the way, the reason you very seldom see persimmon trees, if you can have a persimmon grove and there'll only be 2 or 3 that'll have persimmons on it, that's because there's 10 male trees to 1 female on average. So it takes a lot of persimmon trees to find 1 or 2 that have persimmons on it. Hank has one near his house that is loaded every year. It is absolutely beautiful, 40 feet tall, if not taller, and loaded. The ground will be covered. So I don't know how many male persimmon trees are around that one tree, but it's always a good producer. And I love persimmons. If y'all don't like persimmons, I would suggest you try them, get used to them. You can dry them out, and it's almost like when you dry those, it's almost like custard, almost like dried custard. It's just wonderful, chewy. Butterscotch, yes, it has a butterscotch flavor. I love persimmon, so and I like them. If you get them when they're astringent, when they're still green, and they make your mouth pucker, that's because of astringency. And that leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. Astringency. When you have an astringent, that means it tightens tissues. Can you think of an instance when you would want to tighten tissues? When you need a facelift. How about it with a scrape and the skin looks kind of ragged and mottled after you scrape it on something very jagged, like your kid comes home with a scraped knee and it's just all scruffy. You can use an astringent with an antibacterial and it's going to tighten that tissue. How about gums? Gums, when your gums are very lax, or if you have that little test at the dentist where they stick that little thing, I don't know what that test is called, and they'll say 4, 3, 5, 2, and they're sticking that little pick down into your gum, between your gum and your tooth, to see how lax your gums are. Well, I used to get a lot of 4s and 5s until I started rinsing my mouth with white oak bark. White oak bark is highly astringent, and it tightened those tissues, made my gums better. It actually helped to regrow. They'll say, oh, you can't regrow once they recede, your gums recede, you can't regrow them. I beg to differ, because I know firsthand that it did.
Why don't you just eat green persimmon?
Ah, because the answer's in the question. Ooh, that would just be, I love persimmons, but not green ones.
How long do you rinse your mouth with white oak bark?
20 seconds, yeah, and just 30 seconds, whatever. You know, I brush my teeth and then while I'm doing something else. A lot of people will oil pull for the same reason. You don't realize that coconut oil has an astringency in it, and it's also tightening your gums. However, it's hard to get kids used to spitting in a trash can and not spitting that in the drain. I used to do it while I would get in the shower, and I was doing it for 5-10 minutes while I was in the shower, and then I'd spit it out in the trash can when I got out of the shower. And I kind of stopped. I don't know why. I don't have a reason for you not to do it. I just prefer white oak bark now. And I'll brush my teeth with powdered white oak bark in my tooth powder. And I'll give you a recipe for a tooth powder. I want to talk to you a little bit about teeth in a bit. So,
Not to do what? You said you got out of because of not to do it.
I'm not going to tell you not to. There's no reason not to do it with coconut oil. I just went away from it for whatever, just convenience, or I ran out or something. I just never got any more. Yeah, no, there's no reason for you not to oil pull. I don't have any problem with it, but I just prefer white oak bark. It's just my preference.
Do you harvest that yourself?
I do harvest it myself. Did I turn that off? I just hit it. And how I harvest white oak bark, there's a lot of other astringents, but the reason I like white oak bark is because it's also antiseptic. So if you're using an antibiotic, especially for skin, like a ringworm issue that you're trying to get rid of a parasite or a fungus, white oak bark will work really well. If you have scrapes on your kid's knees, a white oak bark compress or a white oak bark salve would work really well. And when I say white oak bark salve, that means you can put other things in there. Just one of the ingredients is white oak bark. And the way you tell a white oak as from a red oak, red oaks are okay too, but white oak is much better. So that's just my preference because it's more, not necessarily stronger, it's more potent. And you'll do the same with the bark. You'll take off the outer bark because a lot of times the white oak bark will be thick. So you'll want to take off the outer bark and use that cambium layer. Now you wouldn't go and take bark off of the trunk. Why not? You could kill it. If you gird that tree, go all the way around that tree, you're going to kill it. Even if you take off just a small piece on a big trunk, I've got some oaks that are almost as big as the fireplace there. But if you take off a piece about like this, what are you doing? You could be introducing disease into that tree. So my preference is to find a sapling that's, maybe 3 inches diameter and chop that down. A lot of times we're wanting to take out saplings anyway, but you can take those away and use that bark on those saplings just fine. And there won't be a problem with that. But if you're going to use a white oak, the way you find a white oak is you look at the leaf. A white oak bark, or a red oak, let's start with the red oak. A red oak will have a very pointed tip on the leaf. A white oak will have a more rounded tip, almost just round, like not oval, but I don't see a kind of like that on the tip, like the clock here behind me. So it just won't be pointed. The pointed ones are the red oak. There's 100 varieties of oak growing in the southeast. They'll all either be white oak or red oak. Pin oak, live oak, southern oak. Southern oak is the absolute best. And that one you can find it because if it looks like the bark is peeling on it and the bark is kind of peeling sideways, that's a southern white oak, and it's my number one. Just like white pine is my number one, southern white oak is the number one I prefer. But you'll do that cambium layer, and then if you're making teas or you're going to make a compress to put on that scraped knee, you'll make a tea again, or an infusion, which is stronger than just a simple tea. and I'll put a big gob, as my grandmother would say. That's mountain folk for a whole bunch. A big gob of that, just get a big gob of that bark where I've dried it. Usually I'll dry it by the bucket full, especially if you have a big family or a lot of people to take care of. And you get that good sized sapling. When you get all of that bark off of there, you're going to have a decent amount. Grind that up in whatever grinder. You can use like a leaf grinder or a mulcher. What am I thinking of? A leaf shredder, chipper shredder. Grind it up in that so that it's in smaller pieces, and then you can just reach and get a handful out of your container and you use it to make a tea or an infusion. Yes, sir.
If you harvest this from the trunk, does the tree survive and replace that in the same bark?
It's hard for trees to replace bark. It won't do very well. That's why I would prefer to cut off a branch or find a sapling so that you can take that sapling out and it's not going to harm your large tree. And saplings will grow in inconvenient places a lot of times. So I prefer not to take it off the bark unless you off of the trunk, unless you just absolutely have to. I mean, if someone really needed it really bad and I had no other, I would do that. Yes, ma'am.
So rest of the chips, can you take and rehydrate and use later?
Yes, you can. And you don't have to put those in a machine. You can lay them out on window screens. As budding herbalists, there's several things I would suggest that you get. One thing would be go to Habitat and just buy window screens to dry things on. And another thing would be a pack of newsprint, and that's in the moving section where the moving boxes are, the paper that comes in a pack. Lay those on your screens, especially if you're going to lay out your screen somewhere. A lot of times I'll take 2 dining chairs, turn them back to back, and just lay that screen like it was a table, and I'll put that paper on there so the little bits won't fall through, and I'll have to keep sweeping constantly, and I'll lose part of it. So that's 2 things as the budding herbalist I suggest you get for your home apothecary is window screens. And I guarantee you next week there won't be a single window screen at Habitat for Humanity because y'all gonna go get them, right? That's where I get mine. They're about $1, $2, something like that. And you can even make, if you're handy dandy, you can make a screen rack so that you can slide them in and out like drawers and have them spaced about that far apart. You can find prints online, plans online to do that, but that keeps it contained in one area. When in the middle of harvest season, when you come to my house, I live in a 500 square foot house that's about as big as this open area, if it's that big. So you'll find these window screens laying all over my house, because I'm harvesting 30 or 40 things at one time. And I'm drying bucketfuls of them, and I'll leave those in my shop, but I've just got things drying all over the place. But yeah, this window screens are wonderful, and that moving paper, that packing paper, because who reads a newspaper now, right? I haven't seen a newspaper in ages. Yes, ma'am?
So the chips, do you simmer them for like 20 minutes?
You can, yeah. Depending on what you're simmering, on the bark that you're simmering, you can put it in your pot and let it simmer for 20 minutes. Some things I might simmer an hour. Some things I want to pour water over in a jar. It depends on the constituent you're pulling out. If it's something bitter like tannins, you definitely do not want to boil it. So it would be better to pour that water or allow it to simmer without boiling, and that would be, tannins are in white oak. That's a good thing. If you're going to drink that tea, you do not want the tannins because they're very bitter. But if you're going to use it for a compress and you want that astringency, you want those tannins, boil it. So I can't say to you, never boil anything or always boil anything, because it depends. That's what my mentor says all the time. Well, it depends. So, and I know that may be confusing, but you're looking at this one herb, white oak bark, and you're going to use it 10 different ways. So if you need that astringency internally, you don't want it to taste bitter, you don't want it to bind up your gut, so you'll want it to have as few tannins as possible and still get that in your system. You could eat a green persimmon if you needed to, but I'd rather not. So you can put that also with other teas, like a berry tea. A berry is going to be astringent as well. So you could you could even use something like, well, for example, like for diarrhea, you would want something like blackberry root instead of the blackberry itself, because there's not very much tannin in that, but the root has a high amount of tannin. You can tolerate it in your gut because it has an affinity to the gut, where white oak bark has more of an affinity for sore throat, gums, or skin. You wouldn't necessarily want to take that one internally. They're both astringents. Why not use either or? Because one has an affinity more so than the other. Just like you might take a penicillin or an amoxicillin or any other number of antibiotics for a particular issue, but you wouldn't take that antibiotic for another issue. Some herbs are the same way. Yes, ma'am.
Are we going to talk about preserving once you dry them?
Yeah, I can do that. I hadn't thought about that. Once you dry those herbs, usually, just like with anything else, storing it in an airtight container. However, I will store it in a brown paper bag first, quite often, depending on what it is, especially if it's a moist herb, like a fruit or certain leaves. I will store in a bag simply because it'll have more moisture in it, and getting all of that moisture out sometimes it's not easy. For example, I had a 2-gallon container, big plastic container. I try to stay away from plastic, but sometimes I have to use it. And of blue vervain, and this was the buds. Beautiful. I love blue vervain. I use it a lot. It grows in a lot of places. I had gathered up all of these buds, dried them, put them in my container, put the lid on tight. A year later, when I went to use it, within the year, the entire thing had molded because I thought they were dry, but there was still moisture in it. So I will leave those in a brown paper bag. Now I found out I'll leave those in a brown paper bag before I put them in an airtight container. Doesn't have to be everything, and I've just done this by trial and error and personal experience. There are times that I don't want to just go right to storage with my herbs. Sometimes I'll let them dry 3 weeks. Some things will dry in 3 days. So a grass or something like that will dry in just a short amount of time because it's thin, it's easy to dry.
What about those oxygenator things? Are those bad?
No, I would use them. I do use them.
The other thing is I just recently got a thing to put on your mason jar to work with the vacuum sealer. Hold the air out.
Love those things. Yep. The vacuum sealer, little attachment, the jar attachments, great. Take the air out. If you store your herbs properly, they're going to last for several years. So I will store them short term in the brown paper bag. Then they'll go to storage either in a bucket. I find that they work really well. I'll put them in a bag, in a bucket, and then just push the lid down. And these are like the deli buckets, or a pickle bucket, or an icing bucket from the deli bakery. They work just fine. I don't have enough storage for jars because I'll get 5 gallons or 3 gallons of something, and I sell a lot of product. I work with, like I said, I work with a couple hundred herbs regularly, so I store larger amounts because I might make up 2 quarts of tincture at a time. So, but if you're going to use it just for your family, of course, and that's a great place to start, you might only need to store in quart jars. So if you need them if you use quart jars to store them, or smaller jars like something like spilanthes, for example, I suggest everybody grow spilanthes in your garden, simply because if you have a toothache, you can eat one of those buds and it's going to numb you all the way down to here. Try not to swallow the juice because it will numb your vocal cords and you won't be able to, you'll have a problem speaking. Spilanthes, Spilanthes, spilanthes.
You said everyone should grow them, because why?
Because it'll numb mucosal tissues.
But why would we do that?
If you have a toothache, you want that to numb. Yeah, if you have hemorrhoids, you'll want it to numb.
So will it heal at the same time as numbing?
Spilanthes, It has some properties that are healing, but I would use it as an adjunct. I would use it in addition to. Just like there's a lot of people will put clove oil on a tooth. Well, you're killing that nerve. That's very harsh, that clove oil. If you have a toothache and you put straight clove oil on it, you're damaging that nerve. That's not a good thing. You want it, if you're going to use clove oil, and I love clove oil, but you need to water or to thin it down quite a bit because it's very hot. If you were to put that clove oil and just let it sit there on your skin, it might make a place, as my grandmother would say, that's going to make a place. Some people would say that'll make a mark, but my grandmother would say that's going to make a place on you, So just be careful about some, and I use hardly any essential oils because of that reason. They're very hot. I would rather use the real herb itself. But if you're going to grow spilanthes, it will numb mucosal tissues. And that would be tooth, canker sores, cold sores, herpes simplex, anything herpes simplex, like a fever blister or any of those things. Herpes 2 as well. So if you have those types of sores, or you know someone that has those types of sores and they need some numbing because they're very painful, herpes zoster, shingles, those shingles that break open, you can numb those with spilanthes. And a very uncomfortable, that can potentially be dangerous, is hemorrhoids. If hemorrhoids get infected and you can't get to a hospital, they can cause a lot of problems because of that bacteria and being a delicate tissue. When you break that delicate tissue like that, sometimes you need something that's just going to take the feeling out of it and will numb it. So certainly hemorrhoids would work as well with spilanthes. So, yes.
Where do you buy spilanthes?
You can buy it. If you're going to buy a lot of herbs, and I suggest that you do before you can grow them, I strongly urge everybody to grow things. But if you want to stock up your pantry now, Star West Botanicals, and I'm an affiliate. If you don't mind getting my number, if you're going to order, I just make a small commission on it, just a little, and I will be glad to give you an affiliate link for that if you don't mind. Star West Botanicals. Great company, fast delivery. They're sometimes out of things, but they usually get things. That's when everybody is out of something. And when you have a harvest at the end of the season, it's going to be hard to get anywhere something. I know 2 or 3 years ago we had an elderberry shortage because at a certain point there, about 3 years ago, everybody was desperate to get elderberry. Well, elderberry, if you're taking elderberry, I'm just jumping from topic to topic here, if that's okay. Did anybody have another question there? Okay.
Does this spilante grow in this area?
Mm-hmm. I grow it. It has it looks like an eyeball. Looks like a jaundiced eyeball because it's yellow, bright yellow with a little brown spot in the center, and the buds come out and it's just a little kind of an oval. Look it up if you have your phone. If somebody would look that up and show it to everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Can you share your phone number or address that we can order it from?
I can. I have some. I can send it to you. Yes, if you'll text me or email me info. Did we bring cards? I don't know if we brought any cards or not. I think there's some in the truck. Info at Simple Homestead Living, and I keep a supply of spilanthes and other herbs as well. And I grow a lot of herbs and sell them. Things like boneset, that's really good for congestion and inflammation in the lungs. I sell a lot of boneset. And mullein and things like that, but most everybody's got mullein, so I keep it. But so,
That was my question. Where do you get the herbs to grow? Do you buy them?
like for seeds and things, I do a lot of trading here in Asheville. It's hard to throw a rock without hitting an herbalist. So there's a lot of people that grow here in Western North Carolina. So I trade a lot to get starts. The Herb Festival was just 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago and it was wonderful. I bought several $100s, and I had a real big talk, but I didn't walk the walk. I said, I'm going to get everything I need. I'm not holding back. I was telling this to Hank. I'm going to spend, if I have to take my house payment, I'm going to go get everything I want. Well, I got in there and I'm thinking, I'm spending my house payment. Now, I did buy several $100s worth of starts. Because eventually, you know, I had some things. I have a really hard winter. At the elevation that I'm at, I have a hard time keeping some things growing, so I had to restock my stock. Let's see who else is here. Sandy Mush Nursery has a lot of and they're up here. I think they're in that area. Alexander, y'all know where Alexander is in relation to here. It's kind of more that way. If you're looking at the map, Sandy Mush Nursery is in Alexander, west of Marshall. Okay, yeah. They have a lot of herbs. Trying to think of somebody else here locally. I'm drawing a blank on anybody locally. You can find certain starts or certain seeds from Richter's, RHICTERS, or Strictly Medicinals is another seed company that has a lot of medicinals. But you would be amazed at what you can walk right out here and find. And that's what I stress to most people, because I'm very much an ethnobotanist. What's here locally is what I want. And I go out, walk out into the woods, and I find a ton of stuff. There are things that I have to buy, like spilanthes, and I grow it there on my farm. And you can grow it in a pot. It's a unique plant, the spilanthes, and I suggest you have it. You can put it in a little bit of alcohol just as you harvest the buds. Start a jar and put alcohol. I suggest 190 proof. In North Carolina, it's hard to get 190 proof. You can get 150 proof. But if you just get 100 proof alcohol, that's fine too. Just start a small jar. When you harvest a few buds off of it, put them in a jar, pour a little alcohol to cover it, and then as you know, in a couple days when you go harvest some more, put them in that jar and just keep adding to it. No, okay. But spilanthes is great to have, and I strongly suggest, just like comfrey. Comfrey has its uses, and comfrey is one of those things that suddenly they found a problem with comfrey. You know, you can't take it internally. Isn't that odd? Don't you think?
I was going to ask you about comfrey versus the bone set. Is it bone knit, bone set?
Bone set is also called knit bone, not because it will heal a bone, but because of break bone fever. Years ago, I forgot when that was, several decades ago, there was something called break bone fever that made you feel, I mean, it was a flu that made you feel like your bones were just dying. And I had COVID last year, and I swear I thought it was break bone fever, because I could not move without just extreme pain. I didn't have any congestion. It was my head hurt. I would just have to lay with something over my eyes. And anyway, this fever, they found that bone set would break that fever. And it would if you don't want to break a fever unless it gets high, you know, a fever, your body does things for a reason, and fever is one of those things. Inflammation is another thing. Certain inflammations, like if you get stung by a bee and it inflames, I used to put ice on it first thing. Well, there's a reason your body makes that inflammation. So a fever is a good thing to a point, just like diarrhea is a good thing to a point. But bone set will actually help that fever, help your body deal with that fever, bring it down if it needs to, and will also help the inflammation that causes congestion in your lungs. Just like mullein and bone set, and another herb called rabbit tobacco. Do y'all have rabbit tobacco? Yeah, I know you do. But the problem would be recognizing it. It's also called pearly everlasting. That's the same thing. It's pseudonephthalum obtusifolium, and I'm not going to spell that. Now, it does start with a P, pseudo, P-S-E-U-D-O, nephthalum obtus, but that's a G word, pseudognephthalum obtusifolium. It's not as hard as it sounds, but that's rabbit tobacco. And some of us older codgers, you notice I said us, yesterday was my birthday, so I hit a milestone. Do what?
Mine too.
Oh, yours was yesterday? Well, happy birthday.
You too.
Thank you. We went to dinner last night, and there was this little lady at the table. I sat down. She had a what's the Miss America thing, sash. And I said, is this your birthday? And she said, yes. She had hit 80. And I said, well, it's my birthday too. I'm right behind you. And my grandson was born on my birthday too. So yesterday was a big day for us. But she was right behind me, back to back, 2 birthday girls. So anyway, Pseudonaphthalum obtusifolium, rabbit tobacco. Some of us older folks might remember going behind the barn and rolling up rabbit tobacco and smoking it. Well, that was actually a good thing, because it will, if you inhale the smoke on rabbit tobacco and mullein, you will break up congestion in your lungs, stop the inflammation will go down, and there's a specific thing we just had here that had a lot of inflammation that ventilators were not helping, but they were putting us on ventilators anyway, right? Well, that inflammation really is alleviated by boneset and mullein and rabbit tobacco. I have a bronchial formula that has about 15 herbs in it, and those 3 are in it. And I've had people say, come back to me and order. And the way I know it works for them is when they order 8 bottles at a time to keep on hand. It must be doing something right. But there's about 15 herbs in that, but it has those 3. The best way to use those 3 herbs is to put them in a bowl, light them, the dried herb, light them, and put a towel over your head and breathe in that secondhand smoke. And I said that to a group, and this one lady said, I grew up in a home with secondhand smoking. We're dropping left and right from cancer. I'm not going to get secondhand smoking. I'm like, whoa, let's talk about that a minute. This is only a one-time instance where you're going to breathe that in, or 2 or 3 times, enough to get rid of the inflammation. You know, it might be once a day or twice a day, but it's not like living in a home with secondhand smoke. You understand the difference? That smudging, where you put that towel over your head, over that bowl, so that you can breathe in that smoke, is going to really help cleanse your lungs and going to help that inflammation.
Would that have the same effect if you boil it?
It's a little better if you smudge it dry, but you can use the steam. Yeah, if you were going to put it, I would make that liquid and put it in a nebulizer or in a vaporizer. Yeah, so it would, you will get some of that effect from the steam, but it would be better. And it's harsh. I know I gave it to Hank one time, and he was about to cough up a lung. He felt like, he said, because it worked that fast. But he took this big, deep breath of it, and I didn't warn him, you know, breathe slow, breathe shallow. I'd forgot to tell him that. So sometimes little details make a difference, right? But the boneset, you'll know boneset, and it grows wild here. I found a patch. I had some people over, what is today, Sunday? I had some people over Friday for a class, and I showed them boneset growing, and this lady said, that's growing in a ditch right near my house. I said, probably, because it's a native, but it looks like the leaf, the 2 leaves on either side of the stem, actually the stem looks like it's piercing the center of that, and it'll have a white flower on top. Like, where's my kids? What else has a white flower on top, Matthew? What has a white flower on top? We talked about it while we were playing. Wild carrot. It's got a white flower on top like wild carrot, which is Queen Anne's lace. But it'll be a small flower on top, and it grows in a bush where Queen Anne's lace just is a single stem. So it's real easy to tell apart. I was just checking to make sure somebody was listening.
How would you tell the difference between that and poison hemlock?
Boneset doesn't look anything like poison hemlock. However, Queen Anne's lace and poison hemlock are very much alike. if you know what you're looking for, you can tell them apart real easy. And one way to do that is I like to make little rhymes for things. So Queen Anne's lace, the queen has hairy legs under her skirt. So the stem has hairs on it, and underneath the flower, the flower is an umbrella, like an umbrella on top. If you look under that flower, she's got a little skirt. So it's a little green skirt, not a leaf, but it just kind of goes out. And then poison hemlock will have purple splotches, and it'll be a more juicy stem, usually a thicker stem than Queen Anne's lace. Those are composite flowers, meaning if you just look at it, it looks like an umbrella, but if you look at it a little bit closer, you see that it's a lot of little flowers in there, in that umbel. So the development of those little flowers on a Queen Anne's lace is completely different than a poison or a water hemlock. So if you were to hold the two side by side, you'd say, oh yeah, I can see a difference. But if I were to say, go out in the field over there next to that creek and get that flower that's white on top on a long stem with greenery at the bottom, I've just described a half a dozen plants. So sometimes those little details make a difference.
That's a little black dot.
There's a little dot in the center of Queen Anne's lace as well, yeah, in the middle of the flower.
Okay, for somebody like me who doesn't know anything in the nature, so what is there hope to start, where to start? And
Learn one at a time. Learn them one at a time. That's how I learned. How do you tell the difference in corn and tomato? You learned, right? You just learned it. Well, that's the same. Anybody can go out and learn plants, learn to forage.
That app on the phone helps me.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the app.
do you have a class or something?
I do have classes. Yeah, I can talk to you about that in a minute. I'll tell you about the apps, and then we can take a short break and everybody stand up and get something to drink. If you're using an app, they're notoriously inaccurate. Terribly inaccurate, every single one of them, because they're consumer based. They're not, you can go in and correct something for somebody. They're very inaccurate. However, it's a good starting place if you're willing to go back and verify behind yourself. The one I like the best is, what's the name of that one? Leaf Snap, because it will give you a minimum of 4 to 5 suggestions. I will use it, but I will always go find another picture, and then I have to look at things like, I was talking to Matthew, wasn't it you I was telling about the veins? No, it was Kent. For example, on a leaf, you know what the margin is, right? The margin, let's say this is a leaf. The margin is the outside. That's the edge of the leaf. Some of them will be smooth. Some of them will be serrated. And everybody knows what serrated means, right? Kent said, oh, like a bread knife. Yeah, I was thinking pinking shears, but he said bread knife, and I thought, well, okay, that works even better. It's a serrated knife. If those edges are serrated, but the one that you want is smooth, can you just assume that other one is the right plant? Kind of looks like it, so maybe it's right. That's what my plant app said to use, or said it was. Well, it doesn't have the serrated edge, it's got a smooth edge. Is it the same plant? Probably not. So see, you have to look past what your plant app will tell you. Another thing, if you have serrated edges and you have the veins in the leaf, do the veins end here in the valley of the serration of the leaf, or is it at the point of the serration? Where does that vein end? Do the veins run the length of the leaf, or do they go out this way? All of these little things add up, just like you learned the difference in a corn and tomato. You learned that if you didn't know the difference and you just pulled two together, when you're a child, you don't know which one's corn or tomato. So if somebody says, eat your corn, and you're looking at something yellow, you just kind of learn that corn is going to be yellow. and that tomato is red. So it just evolves with what you're learning, and you learn them one at a time. You learned what plantain is today. If you learned, if you went out to the yard, do you think you could find another one? You probably could. I have all faith that you could. So that's how you learn them. You learn them one at a time, and that's why I suggested if you have your phone and I talk about a plant, look it up so that it'll automatically immediately get a connection for you. Okay. Y'all want to take a little break and then we'll come back and talk some more.